All right, and welcome to Spanish con Señora Bisbee. We're going to work today on irregular present tense verbs. So specifically, I'm going to look at the verbs dar, decir, hacer, and ver in the following explanation. So what do I mean when I'm talking about regular versus irregular verbs? Well, there's a difference. Remember, regular verbs have a pattern. So for example, hablar in Spanish is a regular verb because there's nothing odd about it. It's an AR verb, and I can predict the endings it's going to use because all the regular AR verbs end in o, as, a, amos, ais, an. So when I conjugate hablar, it's going to follow that same pattern. So the yo form would be hablo, hablas for tú, habla for él y usted, hablamos for nosotros, habláis para vosotros, y hablan para ellos, ellas y ustedes. If I find other regular AR verbs, they're going to have the same endings. That makes it a regular verb. Irregular verbs do not follow a pattern. They just have to be memorized because they're unique. So for example, you've probably seen the verb ir, to go. This doesn't have predictable endings that are going to be the same with any other verb. It has its own endings, its own unique conjugations. Foi, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. It's just something I have to memorize. That would make it an irregular verb because it doesn't fit in a pattern. So speaking of irregular verbs, you've probably seen these irregular verbs so far. Tener, ser, estar, and ir like we did on the last page. So each of these is unique. It doesn't necessarily follow an exact pattern that matches other verbs. So because of that, we need to memorize their conjugations. Take a second and see if you can remember what the conjugations are for these 4 verbs. Pause the video and we'll check back in just a second. How'd you do with tener? So tener means to have, and remember we can find it in some interesting phrases like tener que plus infinitive to say what one has to do, tener plus años to say how many years someone has, so how old they are, or tener ganas de and then an infinitive to say what someone feels like doing. So the conjugations for this irregular verb are tengo, tienes, tiene, tenemos, tenéis, tienen. Let's check on ser. So for this verb, ser, it means to be. So in English that would be like am, is, or are. It's a linking word. But remember we use ser only in situations for doctore, description, occupation, characteristic, time or date, origin, relationships, or events. So we've got soy, eres, es, somos, sois, son for our conjugations. Let's check in with the star. ESTAR also means to be, so it translates as am, is, or are in the present tense. But remember we use this version of to be with situations from place, position, location, action, conditions, or emotions. Our conjugations are estoy, estás, está, estamos, estáis, están. Notice that the second and third person conjugations all have accent marks. It's very important that we remember these because otherwise, if we forget them, it could change the meaning of the word. All right, let's take a look at ir. Ir means to go, as we saw on the previous slide, and we conjugate it as voy, vas, va, vamos, vais, van. So if I want to say they go to the store, I'd say ellos van a la tienda. Okay, so for new irregular verbs, let's start with the verb ver. Ver means to see. You might see it in expressions like ver la tele, watch TV. Now, ver is a good one to start with because it's not super crazy. Yo veo, I see. Tú ves, you see. Él, ella, usted ve. Nosotros vemos. Vosotros veis. Now it's only one syllable here, so I do not need an accent. Ellos, ellas, ustedes ven. Now the reason this one's nice to start with is because it's not really that irregular. Ver is an ER verb, which means the endings would normally be es, hemos, es, en, just like they are right here. So it kind of follows the ER pattern. The only things that make it strange and irregular is in the yo form. Normally we wouldn't have this E if we were conjugating, remember? Because we get rid of ER and then put on the endings. But because of the shortness of the word, it needs to stick around so we can pronounce it more easily. So it stays, and that makes it a little bit odd. Also, vosotros doesn't need an accent mark because the verb is so short. So ver's irregular, but it's not really that crazy. Now let's talk about the verb dar. It's also kind of like ver in the fact that it's not that far off from what a regular verb would be for AR verbs. This verb means to give. How do we conjugate it? Well, it would be yo, doy, so I give, tú das, you give, él, ella, usted, da, nosotros damos, vosotros dais, y ellos, ellas, ustedes dan. Otra vez, no hay acento en vosotros porque es una sílaba. We've got one syllable, so it's not needed. Just like there, look, it's pretty normal. An AR verb would normally end in as, a, amos, ais, an. The only thing that's strange, this yo form's a little bit funky, and there's no accent on vosotros because the word is so short. So although dar is considered irregular, it pretty much follows an AR verb for its ending, so it should be easy to memorize. Remember, this verb means to give, and our conjugations are doy, das, da, damos, dais, dan. Okay, now we've got this verb hacer, to do or to make is what this means. Now, when we say to do in this case, it means you actually need to do something. For example, like to do your homework or to do an activity. The main verb needs to be to do. So, for example, I do my homework. This would use hacer because the main verb is do. It's only one verb and it's being done to this homework. Versus I do study. Let's say if someone asks, oh, do you study regularly? And you're like, I do study. That's a totally separate situation. The main verb isn't do, it's study. And we learned back when we learned regular conjugations that this do is implied by the conjugation. So if I say, yo estudio, that means I do study. This is not a case that uses hacer. But if I say specifically what I do, and do is the main verb, like I do my homework, then we need this good old verb hacer. It can also be used to make. So like I make cookies, for example. Let's see the weird conjugations. Now hacer is what we call a go verb. We saw this with tener. A go verb means that go appears in the yo form of the verb. So yo hago, I do or I make. Now from here on out, it's a pretty normal verb. It's going to follow the normal pattern for ER verbs. So tú haces, él, ella, usted hace, nosotros hacemos, vosotros hacéis, y ellos, ellas, ustedes hacen. So the only thing strange about this is it's a go verb, so the yo form has a go in it. Everything else follows the pattern for a normal ER verb ending. So if I want to say I do my homework in Spanish, I would say, yo hago mi tarea. I do my homework. Now of the four verbs that are irregular that we're going to cover today, DECIR is the most unique. It kind of behaves like tener when you learn tener. Tener is a go verb, but it also shows qualities of a stem change verb. DECIR does the same thing. So we already know what I mean by a go verb. That means in the yo form, a go is going to appear to help with the pronunciation of the verb. So to say I say or I tell, yo digo. We've got our go. Now you'll also notice in this yo form that this letter E changed to an I. It's not dego, it's digo. So this is what we call a stem change verb. So we remember that a stem is the part of the verb that's left when we take off the ending. So if I take off the IR, which is the infinitive ending, I'm left with DEC. That's my stem. Now a stem change means that there's going to be a spelling change. And in this case, this letter E changes to an I, and this only happens in certain conjugations. You may have heard the term boot verb before. it's called that because the spelling change is going to occur only in these conjugations on the verb chart, which when we look at it and outline it, it kind of makes the crude shape of a boot. So in all these conjugations, this letter E in the stem is going to change to an I. So let's take a look at them. Tú dices, él, ella, usted dice, nosotros decimos, vosotros decís, and ellos, ellas, ustedes dicen. So as we can see, that spelling change shows up inside this boot shape. The E changes to an I. And then besides that, we've got our normal IR verb endings. Es, imos, is, en. So if we can think about these rules, it should be easier to memorize for us. Yo digo, tú dices, él, ella, usted dice, nosotros decimos, vosotros decís, ellos, ellas, ustedes dicen. Awesome. Great job with those conjugations. Now it just comes down to practice and memorization. So remember, our verbs today were dar, decir, hacer, and ver. To practice, you can practice writing down the verb charts. Some people like that muscle memory of actually writing it over and over. For me, that's what works best to memorize a new verb. Or you can use online sites like conjugations.com to practice your conjugations, or make yourself some flashcards. Whatever's going to work for you to memorize these verbs. We need to remember what they mean, as well as what their conjugations include. So good luck, buena suerte, y nos vemos pronto. We'll see each other soon. Adiós, gracias.